Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Enugu, lived an extremely wealthy woman who was one of the wealthiest women in the state. She was a paragon of affluence, grace, and influence. Her mansion, a grand estate with golden gates and marble floors, was the envy of many. But amidst the glitz and glamour, Neddy had one treasure that outshone all her material wealth: her only son, Chiejina. From the day Chiejina was born, Neddy lavished him with everything his little heart desired: golden rattles, silk baby clothes imported from Europe, and a nursery painted with real gold accents. As he grew older, nothing changed. He had the best tutors, the most expensive gadgets, and cars no teenager would ever dream of possessing. If Chejina had wanted the moon, Neddy would have paid a team of scientists to go fetch it for him. She loved her son so much and showered him with so much luxury. But amid all the luxury, discipline was a stranger in Neddy's home. One day, this was when Chejina was 10 years old, he broke the principal's office window with a rock because he was scolded for being late to school. When summoned, his mother Neddy swept into the school in her luxury SUV, wearing sunglasses worth more than the principal's annual salary. "My son must have had a reason," she declared haughtily as she made excuses for him. The principal shook his head as he tried advising Neddy that her son Chejina needed some form of guidance. "He cannot keep doing as he pleases," the principal said to Neddy, who bursted out in anger. "Are you trying to teach me how to be a mother?" she asked the principal angrily as she reminded him of his place in the society. "You are only a mere principal in this school, and that doesn't give you the right to tell me how to raise my son," Neddy hissed, her voice sharp and cutting. The principal shook his head as he spoke gently. "Madam Neddy, I only speak because I care, but if you cannot see the danger ahead, then I have done my part." With a dramatic wave of the hand, Neddy turned as she marched out of the principal's office, her heels clicking against the polished tiles. Chejina smirked as he walked behind her. That day marked the beginning of a dangerous pattern, a pattern where Chejina realized that no matter what he did, his mother would always shield him from consequences. A few weeks later, Chejina returned home to meet his nanny Soma. She got him out of his uniform and changed him into plain clothes. As Soma tried to leave the room, Chejina grabbed her breast and began to laugh. Soma could not believe what had just happened. She smacked him hard across the face, warning him never to try such nonsense with her again. But Chejina, instead of apologizing, began to cry aloud. His mother Neddy, who was in her room at the time, rushed out to meet him crying. She asked what had happened, and Soma explained what Chejina did to her. Neddy, instead of scolding her son, slapped Soma across the face. "How dare you slap my son? Because he touched your breast? Are your breasts made of gold?" she asked Soma, who stood there shocked to hear what her madam had to say. "The next time you lay your finger on my son will be the last time you would ever be free to roam the earth," Neddy said as she walked out angrily with her son. Soma stood there as she contemplated leaving their home. However, her sick mother's condition made it difficult for her to leave as she needed the money to take care of her mother and younger sisters. She continued to care for Chejina, who continued to touch her inappropriately without fear. Soma endured the humiliation for years until she got a better job and left their home. Several nannies came and went, and Chejina touched them inappropriately without recourse. No one dared to complain, knowing how much his mother Neddy was willing to go to protect her son. By the time Chejina turned 18, he was practically untouchable. He had a fleet of luxury cars, wore designer clothes, and lived life without restraint. Nights were spent in clubs where alcohol and loud music became his sanctuary. When he carelessly crashed his first sports car, Neddy simply replaced it with an even flashier one. "He's just a boy. Let him enjoy his youth," She said dismissively to her sister Oloma, who didn't like the way that she spoiled her son. Neddy saw nothing wrong in allowing her son to spend her money. After all, he was the heir to all her fortune, and Neddy spared no expense when it came to him. He had a fat bank account and traveled to whatever country that he wanted. Chejina was reckless and cruel. He treated people poorly, spoke harshly to domestic staff, and had no regard for anyone's feelings. His childhood fantasies grew into sexual perversions as Chejina began to prey on vulnerable young women, charming them with sweet words and empty promises. A certain girl named Ifunanya, who was a bright university student from a poor family, fell for his charm and before long got pregnant. When she told Chejina the news, he laughed in her face and told her to get rid of the pregnancy. Ifunanya stood there stunned, as she never expected such a reaction from him. Chejina had pretended to love her, just to steal her virginity, and Ifunanya could not help but feel used. She spoke to her friend Cheta, who advised her to go tell his mother. Ifunanya, heeding her friend's advice, decided to pay Nnedi a visit. She arrived at the gates of the grand mansion and met the security officers who refused her entry into the mansion without a formal invitation. Ifunanya did all she could to gain access to the mansion, but all her efforts yielded no result. So, Ifunanya decided to go home and re-strategize. As she was about leaving, a luxury SUV pulled up to the gate. Ifunanya peeped through the window and realized that it was his mother. She quickly approached the SUV and Nnedi gestured for the security to allow her in. Ifunanya quickly walked into the mansion and could not believe how beautiful it looked. All her life, she had never been to a place this beautiful, and Ifunanya could not help but stare. She approached the car and met Nnedi, who looked at her disgustingly and asked what she wanted. Ifunanya comported herself and narrated how Chejina got her pregnant. She narrated her ordeal to her voice trembling as she spoke about how Chejina had deceived her, stolen her innocence, and abandoned her with a pregnancy. Her tears flowed freely as she recounted the entire story. Nnedi stood there, her expression cold and unreadable. When Ifunanya finished speaking, Nnedi let out a short, humorless laughter. "Do you think you are the first girl to come here with your pathetic story? Do you think I don't know the likes of you? Gold diggers, all of you," Ifunanya gasped, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. "Madam, I'm telling you the truth. I'm not here for your money. I just need your son to take responsibility. Please, my family is poor and I cannot do this alone." But Nnedi wasn't listening. She reached into her purse and brought out a bundle of money and flung to Ifunanya's face. "Take this and get rid of that thing in your stomach," she said as she snapped her fingers, summoning her security men who appeared before her. "Take this girl out of my compound, and if she ever sets her foot here again, let the dogs loose on her." "No, ma'am, please," Ifunanya cried as the guards grabbed her by the arms and dragged her out of the mansion. As the grand gates closed behind her, Ifunanya realized that she was alone in her struggle. She returned and met her friend, who advised her not to get rid of the pregnancy. Ifunanya did not know what to do. She was so terrified of the dangers of an abortion. All the horrific stories she had heard whilst growing up of the women who lost their lives to abortion began to flood her mind. She thought of her poor parents who sold all they had to send her to school. "I can't let them down by keeping this pregnancy," she said to her friend Cheta, who understood her dilemma. "I'll stand by you no matter what decision you take," Cheta said to Ifunanya, who thanked her for being a good friend. Months passed and Chejina's behavior continued to grow worse. Several other women showed up at his mother's doorstep, claiming that they were pregnant for him, and Nnedi, as usual, threw money at them, ordering them to get rid of the pregnancy. She even began to suspect that the women were only claiming to be pregnant just to extort money from her. Nnedi made up her mind in that moment not to give a dime to any other woman who comes to her home claiming to be pregnant. She sat down there exhausted when her security rushed to inform her that a young woman was at her gate. Her body is stained with blood, he said to Neddy, who asked him to let her in. Neddy could feel her heart race. She waited patiently for the young woman, who approached her in tears. She asked what she wanted, and the young woman revealed that her son Chejina forced himself on her. He raped me, the young woman cried as tears poured down her eyes. Neddy could see the blood on her clothes. She stared at the young woman in disgust as she blamed her for everything that happened. Why did you make yourself available to my son in the first place? If you were home with your family, all this would not have happened. The young woman, whose name was Uche, froze in shock to hear such spiteful words from her. She stood there as Neddy asked if her son was the first to take advantage of a girl in the world. Is my son the first to rape a woman? You cheap whores need to take your filthy selves away from my son, she said to Uche, who was then thrown out of her home and warned never to come close to Chejina again. Neddy at this point had lost count of the number of women who were either pregnant for her son or had a bitter encounter with him. It was now exhausting, and Neddy made up her mind not to entertain such complaints again. The next morning, she was about leaving the house for the office when a group of police officers swarmed into her home to apprehend her son Chejina. He was wanted for raping the young woman Uche, and Neddy did all she could to intervene. She took some officers to the side and offered to give them a huge sum of money as bribe to set her son free, but the officers blatantly refused as they went on to arrest her for bribery. Neddy could not believe her eyes. She called all the prominent people that she knew in the state, but no one was able to free her son and herself from the hands of the police. Neddy could not understand why. She sat down in the interrogation room when the investigating officer walked in, and Neddy realized that it was Soma, her former nanny, who Chejina touched inappropriately. Soma was hell-bent on pursuing the case to the end. Neddy froze as she stared at Soma, her former nanny, now dressed sharply in a police uniform with the rank of a senior officer glinting on her shoulders. Her once timid and submissive demeanor had now been replaced by an air of authority and quiet power. Soma, Neddy stammered, her voice trembling. Yes, Madam Neddy, Soma said calmly, her eyes cold and sharp. Do you remember me? Do you remember how you protected your son every time he violated me and every woman who came after me? Do you remember how you slapped me and called my dignity worthless? Well, it seems life has brought us full circle. Neddy's mouth went dry. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Soma continued, We've been watching you and your son for months. Every cover-up, every bribe, every threat. You thought you were untouchable, but now not anymore. She pulled out a small recorder and pressed play. The room was now filled with the sound of Neddy's voice, offering bribes to the arresting officers earlier that day. How much do you want? Name your price. I'll double it. No, I'll even triple it. Just let my son go. Her voice echoed in the interrogation room. Neddy's head dropped into her hands. She knew there was no escape this time. She sat there and listened as Soma continued to speak. The young girl your son assaulted, Uche, is the daughter of Chief Okoye. He's one of the most powerful men in this country, and unlike you, he knows the value of justice. Your wealth can't save you this time, Madam Neddy. The news spread like wildfire. Billionaire's son arrested for rape. Mother detained for bribery attempt. The headlines were everywhere. Investors pulled out of Neddy's company overnight, and her company's stock value plummeted. Chief Okoye did everything within his power to ensure that his daughter Uche got justice for what Chejina did to her. The evidence in court was irrefutable. The recording of Nnedi's bribe attempt and the testimonies of other victims, including Soma, painted a grim picture. Chejina was sentenced to 25 years in prison, whilst his mother Nnedi was given 10 years for obstruction of justice and bribery. The once powerful Nnedi was escorted out of the courtroom in handcuffs, her designer outfit and expensive jewelry, offering no protection against the harsh glares of the public. Months later, Nnedi sat alone in her prison cell, stripped of her luxury and status. The golden gates of her mansion had been replaced with cold iron bars and concrete walls. Her once flawed makeup was smudged and her designer clothes had been replaced with a prison uniform. Chejina, on the other hand, struggled to adapt to prison life. Stripped of his wealth and power, he faced the consequences of his actions daily. The prison guards and inmates showed him no mercy, and he began to regret the life that he lived. 10 years passed, and Nnedi was released from prison. She was now a shadow of her former self, aged, weak, and broken. Her mansion had been seized, her company had collapsed, and her wealth had vanished like it never existed. Nnedi wandered the streets of Enugu, passing people who once admired her. She arrived her sister's home moments later, and her sister Oloma could not believe what her once wealthy sister had been reduced to. She offered her a room in her home, and Nnedi struggled to live with the shame. Her son Chejina was still in prison, and Nnedi found it hard to forgive herself, knowing that she had destroyed her son. She visited the prison where Chejina was still serving his sentence. When she saw him, her heart broke to see how thin he had become. Chejina narrated the painful ordeal he had suffered in the hands of his fellow inmates. He regretted his actions and wished his mother had corrected him all those years. Nnedi was so heartbroken to see the pain in her son's eyes. She burst out into tears as she apologized to him for her role in all that had happened. For the first time, mother and son acknowledged the consequences of their actions, but it was too late as the damage had already been done. Chejina served his sentence and was later released when he was almost 45 years old. He got out of prison and noticed how everywhere had changed. 25 years was such a long time to be locked away, and Chejina was so grateful to finally be out. He arrived his mother's little house, which was a stark contrast to the luxury that he grew up enjoying. His mother was now old, and Chejina could see the regret in her eyes. They lived a quiet life, and Chejina began to build his life again. He went out in search of jobs, but no one was willing to hire an ex-convict. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Chejina roamed the streets of Enugu, searching for a job, but no matter how hard he tried, rejection was the only response he received. His past clung to him like a shadow, and every potential employer turned him away once they discovered his past crime. One fateful afternoon, as the sun beat down on his weary shoulders, Chejina stumbled upon a sign outside a towering glass building. "Cleaners wanted. Apply within," the sign said. Desperation pushed him through the gleaming glass door. The lobby was immaculate, with marble floors that reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Chejina felt out of place, his worn clothes and weathered face a stark contrast to the polished world he had stepped into. He approached the receptionist hesitantly. "I'm here for the cleaning job," he said softly. The receptionist glanced at him, her eyes briefly scanning his rough appearance before nodding. "Take a seat. Someone will attend to you shortly." Minutes later, a middle-aged manager arrived and led Chejina into a small office. "We need cleaners who are diligent and honest," the manager said, looking him in the eye. "This job isn't glamorous, but it's steady work." "I'll do it," Chejina replied earnestly. "I'll work harder than anyone else. Please just give me a chance." The manager studied him for a moment and sighed. "You start tomorrow," he said. And for the first time in years, Chejina felt hope stir up in his chest. What Chejina did not know was that the company belonged to Ifunanya. the very woman he got pregnant and abandoned all those years ago. Ifunanya had refused to let hardship define her. After giving birth to her son, whom she named Obina, she worked tirelessly, juggling multiple jobs, whilst attending evening classes. Her intelligence and determination caught the attention of a mentor who funded her business idea. Over the years, her modest startup blossomed into a multi-million naira corporation, making her one of the most influential women in Enugu. Despite her success, Ifunanya remained humble, raising Obina with discipline, love, and a strong sense of responsibility. She never let her past bitterness cloud her vision for the future. Chiejina threw himself into his new job. He scrubbed floors, cleaned windows, and carried heavy beams without complaints. The other staff noticed his dedication, and some even began to show him kindness. But Chiejina never looked up from his work, carrying a quiet sense of shame wherever he went. One afternoon, whilst mopping the executive hallway, he saw a familiar face in a large portrait hanging on the wall. His mop clattered to the floor as he stared at the photograph in disbelief. It was Ifunanya, dressed in an elegant suit, her gaze confident and commanding. Next to her was a handsome young man who happened to be her son. Chiejina could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He could not believe that Ifunanya owned the company that he now worked as a cleaner. His mind replayed all the horrible things that he said to her when she told him that she was pregnant. He stared at the picture again, focusing on the young man next to her, who happened to be around 25 years old. Could he be my son? Chejina thought deeply as he finished up his cleaning and headed back home. Ifunanya happened to be one of the richest women in the state. Her son Obina grew up to be a fine young man, well educated, disciplined, and kind-hearted. Unlike Chejina, Obina was raised with a strong moral compass. Ifunanya had worked tirelessly to ensure that he had both love and structure in his life, qualities that made him respected by employees and peers alike. One evening, as Ifunanya walked through the halls of her company, she noticed a man mopping the floor with quiet determination. There was something about him, a brokenness in his posture, a heaviness in his movements that caught her attention. "Good evening, ma," Chejina said without lifting his head. That voice, it hit Ifunanya like a thunderbolt. Her heart froze and her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she stepped closer and looked at his face. Though time and hardship had weathered it, she recognized him instantly. "Chejina," she said, her voice trembling slightly. As their eyes met, his face paled and the mop slipped from his grasp. "Ifunanya," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Follow me," she said sternly and turned on her heels, leading him to her office. The office was grand and filled with an air of power. Chejina stood awkwardly near the door, his head bowed, his hands trembling. "You work here?" Ifunanya asked coldly, her arms crossed. "Yes," he whispered. "After everything you did to me, after the humiliation, the abandonment, you are now sweeping the floors of my company." Chejina fell to his knees. "Ifunanya, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I know my words mean nothing now, but please forgive me. I've paid for my sins. Years in prison, rejection from society. I've lost everything." Ifunanya's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but her voice remained firm. "Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep? How many times I wondered if I made the right choice by keeping Obina? You robbed me of my dignity, Chejina, but despite everything, I survived, and my son is a good man because I refused to let him become like you." Chejina's shoulders shook with silent sobs. Does he know about me?" "No," Ifunanya said sharply. "I never told him. I don't want your shadow darkening his life. But now, seeing you like this," she paused, exhaling deeply. "You continue working here, but you will stay away from Obina. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Ifunanya, I understand. Thank you. Thank you for letting me work here." Weeks passed, and Chejina remained a diligent cleaner in the company. He avoided Obina as instructed, but could not help but admire him from a distance. He was everything that he wasn't, but Chiejina dared not to approach him. He could not ruin his chances of being around his son, so he kept his distance, hoping that someday Ifunanya would finally tell their son who he truly was. One stormy night, when most of the staff had already left the office, Obina remained behind, poring over financial reports in the office. The glow from his desk lamp illuminated his focused face as the rain pounded against the tall glass windows. Meanwhile, Chejina was still at work, mopping the floors on the executive level. His aging body ached, but he kept going, determined to prove his worth. He had noticed Obina was still in the office, but dared not to approach him. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed down the hallway, followed by a groan. Alarmed, Chejina dropped his mop and rushed towards the sound. He pushed open the door to Obina's office and froze. Obina was lying on the floor, clutching his stomach, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Sir, are you okay?" Chejina stammered as he rushed to his son's side. "Help me," Obina said weakly before his eyes rolled back. Panic surged through Chejina as he immediately rushed him to the hospital. He did all he could to get through to Ifunanya, who refused to take his calls. As doctors rushed Obina into the emergency room, a nurse approached Chejina. "Are you a family member?" she asked. "Yes, I'm his father," Chejina blurted out without thinking. "We need someone to authorize emergency procedures. Your son has a kidney failure and will need a donor immediately. Are you willing to be tested as a match?" "Yes," Chejina said without hesitation. "Test me. Do whatever you have to do. Just save my son's life." Whilst waiting for the results, Chejina tried calling Ifunanya repeatedly. Each call went unanswered. He sent text messages, left voice messages, and even tried reaching her assistant, but it seemed that she was unreachable. As hours passed, the nurse returned with the test result, revealing that he was a match. Chejina let out a shaky breath as he permitted them to take his kidney. "Take whatever you need from me, but make sure that you save his life," he said as the nurse smiled softly. Chejina was wheeled into the operating room alongside his son Obina. The surgeons worked tirelessly, and after hours of delicate procedures, the kidney transplant was successfully completed. Both father and son were moved to the recovery room. Chejina was so weak from the surgery, but his heart felt light. For the first time in his life, he felt like he had done something right. When Ifunanya finally checked her phone the next morning, she saw the dozens of missed calls and frantic messages from Chejina. Her heart dropped as she rushed to the hospital. "What happened?" she demanded. "Your son suffered kidney failure, madam. He was fortunate. His father was here and donated a kidney. He saved his life." Ifunanya's knees buckled as she clutched the bed rail for support. "Where? Where is he?" she whispered. The nurse pointed to the recovery room across the hall. Ifunanya entered the dimly lit recovery room and saw Chejina lying weakly on the bed, his face pale but peaceful. His eyes fluttered open, and they locked eyes. "You saved him," Ifunanya said softly, her voice trembling. Chejina smiled faintly. "I couldn't let him die, Ifunanya. He's my son, our son." Tears spilled down Ifunanya's cheeks as years of resentment and anger began to crack. "Why did you do it? After everything?" "Because I owe him everything. I owe you everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but at least I can say I did something right this time." Ifunanya sat beside him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Thank you, Chejina. You saved our son." Obina's recovery was slow but steady. When he learned about the donor, he was stunned. "You gave me your kidney?" he asked Chejina one afternoon. "Yes, son," Chejina said softly, his voice thick with emotions. "I'm so sorry for everything I've done, for not being there, but I'm proud of the man that you've become." Obina reached out and squeezed his father's hand as he thanked him for saving his life. Chejina returned to his job at the company, not as a cleaner, but as a maintenance supervisor. Obina visited him often, seeking his advice and sharing updates on his work. Ifunanya, though still cautious, allowed herself to let go of her bitterness. She had seen the sacrifice Chejina made and knew that he was now a changed man. Although they never got back together, Chejina got the chance to be in his son's life, and that was enough for him. His mother apologized to Ifunanya for all the terrible things that she did to her, and Ifunanya made the painful decision to forgive. She was not willing to live with the hurt forever and knew that forgiving was the only way out. The lesson to be learned from this story is that wealth, power, and status cannot replace discipline, values, and accountability. Shielding children from consequences does not protect them, but rather it destroys them. Parenting requires discipline and not just love. So, parents should learn how to love their children whilst also instilling discipline in them. After all, as it is widely said, foolishness abounds in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him. Do right by your children today and reap the benefits much later in life. I hope you enjoyed the story.